Welcome back to Historical Projects, a community podcast exploring project success and leadership. I'm David, and today we're exploring one of the most ambitious innovation projects in human history. And yes, it's the Library of Alexandria. Now, it wasn't just a building. It was a bold statement that human understanding could be collected, organised, and expanded in just one place. And joining us today, I'm very excited, for our conversation is Dewetia. Now, Dewetia is an accomplished, experienced process engineer who actually started her career as a geologist. And now she develops high-level strategies at a global company. Together, we're going to discuss the Library of Alexandria and the key lessons it offers, bringing a sharp focus on innovation and some key lessons. Dewetia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
Now, I want to start off with a question, Dewetia. What first drew you to the story of the Library of Alexandria, and why does it stay with you?
You know, David, it's very interesting that when I was little, I've always loved to learn. I've loved books. I loved libraries, just local libraries. I grew up in small towns, but all those books that hold so many mysteries and so many learnings. So learning about the Library of Alexandria, which was just such a focal point in the entire history, that really drew me to it.
That's amazing, isn't it? I'm like you, Dewetia. I can almost see myself sitting there reading the World Book encyclopedias and turning the pages at some of these buildings
Exactly.
that we're actually talking about now. It's wonderful. So let's start at the beginning, Dewetia. Can you take us back to where this all began?
Sure. You know, David, legends credit Alexander the Great to have founded to have started the library, but it really wasn't him. Was he originated Alexandria? He did not do the library as such, and the historians show that the Ptolemies, first Ptolemy the First, was the visionary. He proposed the idea of the library, and then Ptolemy the Second was the one who executed the bulk of it, and he was the one who acquired those early collections. And the aim that the Ptolemies had for the library was just incredible. It was just sweeping. The idea was to collect every written work that was in existence at the time and to translate those texts into Greek. You can just see like armies of people translating text, isn't it? And then there were scholars that they wanted to support because they studied there. They studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, philosophy, and they advanced knowledge because people were there working together, debating, teaching each other, which must have just been tremendous. And we know that at its height, the library could have held something between 40,000, 400,000 scrolls, which is roughly the equivalent of about 100,000 modern books. And not only was it a library, it was really an engine, a knowledge engine, staffed by the scholars who lived, worked, and researched there, which is just so inspiring, isn't it?
Dewetia, when you picture the library at its height, what's the detail that captures your imagination?
David, you know, I thought much about this library, and I'm just thinking about those thousands of scrolls just stacked one upon the other, and they would have had little clay labels so that they could be retrieved. And those librarians were walking through those stacks of scrolls, cataloging, trying to retrieve things. Oh, it's just amazing to think about their job, those librarians, and working in the library.
Because it would have been a cool job, because it would have been right at the edge. Because it wasn't like we had
Exactly.
libraries all over the place. It would have been someone at the beginning of this journey of trying to work out how we're going to collect knowledge and systemize it.
Exactly, and how to store it, isn't it? Because I mean, we can't say today because of course the scrolls no longer exist. But would they have stored them by author, by topic, by importance somehow? It's really interesting to think like how would people have catalogued their things in those ancient days? Because this would have been the start. There would have been none such thing before. How incredible!
And for me, when I just think, because of the scrolls, Real estate would have been important because today books are so condensed. But imagine 400,000 scrolls. If we just look at each scroll as, say, I don't know, 50 mil diameter, the engineer in me wants to multiply that out diameter and to fill a space, it would have been enormous. Now,
Yeah.
Dewetia, what was the library's status and operation about? How did it work and how was it perceived around the world?
Of course, at that time, David, we're talking about the ancient world, so it had sort of limits. But there's no question that the library was the intellectual center of that world, and scholars traveled. They came from around the Mediterranean to come and study there, to come and research and debate there. And Alexandria's reputation grew as a center of learning. Even today, when we read things, it's often referred to as a center for research and learnings. And what we know is that the Ptolemies invested heavily in this project. So they were searching for every book, every scroll that they could find. And when ships arrived in Alexandria, which of course a port city, they were searching the ships for scrolls, and they would have copied what they found. We've learned that the originals were kept in the library and that copies were returned to their owners. Such an aggressive acquisition strategy, but basically made Alexandria outpace any other rival that it might have. And it stood the library in good stead because for centuries it stayed strong like that. But of course, we know the sad story. It started to decline around 145 BC when there were just shifting priorities. There seems to have been less support, political instability. It's still a bit of a mystery, I think, as to what exactly happened. But there wasn't a single catastrophic event like the fire that we know exists in popular myth. But historians today believe that the decline happened gradually over centuries through a combination of those political conflicts, neglect, lack of support, other potentially smaller destructive events. But what we definitely know is, but by late antiquity, the library had faded from prominence. But a legacy remains, though, and it endured, and it shaped how later civilizations thought about knowledge and about collecting and preserving it, which is incredible by itself, isn't it?
Look, it is. And I know I was just recently talking to someone and about the podcast that we're doing in the Library of Alexandria. And when I say that to people, they all know it. It's really weird. Like they all know it from something that doesn't exist from a long, long time ago. But when you think of libraries, and if you ask people what is a famous library, they say the Library of Alexandria. So and the myth, and they would then follow up with the myth that it was burnt and destroyed. But it is quite an amazing story that's continued with us for so long. Really,
Exactly.
it is. Let's imagine now we have a time machine and you step in it and we go back. And if you could walk into the library for 5 minutes, what would you want to see or how would you want to feel?
Oh, interesting question, David, because there would be so much to see. I honestly, I think I would need to speak to the librarian because I'd need to ask him or her to take me to the work of those early mathematicians and astronomers. I would just love to see those drawings. Wouldn't you love to see how Eratosthenes perhaps how did he go about measuring the circumference of the earth? Like where are those little drawings that they must have had, Euclid with the geometry? And I would love to see some of that on a scroll. That would be amazing.
Look, I could just imagine you, Devesh, to be like a child in a lolly shop. Well, that's how I would be. I'd be running from room to room and just talking and it'd be amazing. Like in the research that you've done, have there been any other interesting facts that you thought, oh, I didn't know about that?
David, the most interesting thing that I thought when I was looking at this again is that we're not really talking about a single large building with scrolls. It's more of a complex. It's more of a research campus, as if you wish. It had what it was called the Mosaic, which had some lecture halls. It had some gardens, some dining rooms for scholars to get together, some living quarters, because of course when people traveled those days, it wasn't sort of propelling in for 2-day visit and out. They came to stay there for months on end. So it was really more like an ancient university. And I've been reading a lot about India as well, and I know that Nalanda, which is in India, is what we credit today as the first university. But in fact, Alexandria predates that by 700 years or so. Nalanda was in the 5th century, it's Common Era. And it was also like a really big center who hosted, incredible people, and people also came all over the world to study there. But Alexandria was really first, and it did have some incredible people that came to work there. We've already talked about Eratosthenes. I mean, Archimedes was there, Euclid was there. They did incredible work there.
Well, thank you. Now, that paints a really vivid picture of the library at the time, which is fantastic. So, what I'd like to do now is talk and open it up to try and learn a little bit more about the lessons that we can take away from that. And I want to start off with a question that, again, picking up, the library's founders believed they could gather all the world's knowledge. What does that level of ambition spark for you as a person who works in strategy?
It's very interesting question that, David, because it's an all-encompassing goal, isn't it? Gathering all the knowledge in the world. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, if someone said that to you today, you would say, well, that's not possible. But still, they had that as a goal. I mean, how inspirational is that? And I feel that as one puts forward a strategy, of course, it needs to be attainable. It can't be like ridiculous. But if you can convey that message, that inspiration of something really grand, really transformational, it will be inspiring to everyone that's involved. And it must have been inspiring to everyone involved in creating the library. And I think that's a really essential element for innovative projects. It must have a grand vision.
Because that grand vision is what attracted all of those knowledgeable people. If it wasn't an
Mhm.
exciting and if they didn't build this credibility, those scholars would not have made it there. And of course, with the scholars going there, increases the credibility of the institution. And it sort of grows and grows and grows. If I think about your career, which has been a long and very successful career, have you ever worked on a project where the vision felt as sweeping as this one to capture all the world's information and knowledge? Have you ever worked on that?
David, I think innovation projects often do have these sweeping visions. Now, of course, when one works for a company, it's sometimes confined to that company alone. But I mean, we have seen incredible visionary events in history. The Industrial Revolution, I feel, has been one of those things. And today, I feel, and we are certainly working on this, that decarbonization is that kind of challenge to the world. We need to do something about decarbonizing our world, about electrification, about changing our processes, about changing over from fossil fuels to electricity. That is an incredibly sweeping vision as well. I mean, we only see things in the world today that put so much pressure on all of our systems. This is a vision that I feel, well, it needs to come from the very top, and it does come in certain places from governments, but it needs to have that momentum from basically everyone, isn't it, to make that change possible.
And it's quite topical because as we record this, we know what's happening with respect to Iran and Israel and America in the Middle East. And we can see the fear it's coming through because it's going to interrupt all of the petroleum products that we rely on daily. So you can see this vision, and that's almost like an impetus as I reflect on it, Dewetia, because it's actually highlighting that we need to change
It is,
as
and
well.
sometimes those big projects find real sort of times of boost when there's a burning platform like there is today, as you correctly highlight. So it might get a bit of a boost at this moment, but I feel it's one of those really big changes for the world that we live in, which is very exciting as well, isn't it?
Another question, Dewetia, what do you think modern organisations get right or wrong about setting these bold innovation goals?
I don't think, David, that it's really the goals that is the issue. I think if we listen to people speak, whether that be scientists or politicians or, people in senior leading roles in our society, they do talk about bold goals. But I don't think we stick to those goals because our world is much more short-term focused today. And when we see leaders of organizations, governments, when they talk, it's very different. They don't talk about intergenerational goals, or they might talk about it in sort of the loftiest words and phrases, but to actually put some actions to that, which will only benefit their successors, that doesn't seem to me to be so easy. And I think that's what happened in Alexandria as well. Once those early generations have stopped perhaps supporting and the momentum was no longer there, it was much harder to sustain the library. And I feel that's very similar what we have today. If we think about what we're leaving behind for our children, what we should do to leave them a better world, then we need to set goals where we might need to take some pain to benefit them. But that seems to be very hard in a world that's very short-term focused, and I don't think, the sort of social media helps us here, where everyone is thinking just in sort of 2-minute bites, and rather than what I should do for next generations. So that's a real big challenge, I feel.
What's interesting is I just finished recording the Sagrada Familia, the wonderful church in Barcelona with Derek. And it was fascinating. This church took 120 years and it was actually community funded. It wasn't funded by any government. But what was really interesting, when Derek looked at it, he looked at it from an NPV and he said, there's no way net present value that would ever get up. It just wouldn't. You want to build something that's going to take 120 years, forget it. La Sagrada Familia brings in billions of dollars of revenue a year. Now, what he shared with me was just gate receipts alone is about 120 million euros. It's the most visited place in Spain. But what's important is Barcelona, when they track back to all the hotels, all of the employment, not
Wow.
directly, but who are people who are working because of that incredible structure and the legacy it's left. So it's another one of those examples, isn't it, that if they'd gone at the start and said, we're not going to build this, it'll never get off the ground. But here we are now, 120 years later, and it continues to give back. And the longer it goes, it'll just keep giving back and giving back. But that is that challenge, isn't it? It
Yes,
really is.
absolutely.
If we talk a little bit about strategy, and I know you've done a lot of work in this space, the library's mission including collecting, translating, organising, and expanding knowledge. Which of those strategic pillars resonates most for your work?
For me, I think in that logistics chain, I would choose translating because I feel that's one of the things that I love doing the most. I love looking through all of those pieces of information and distilling it into the key themes or to identify the key challenges, the key issues. And then, of course, it goes forward into actually turning it into some actions. That's something else. But I feel that translating large amounts into three dot points is something that I really like to do.
And what I find interesting now is, if we sort of digress a little bit, we'll come back, is this concept of AI.
Mm.
And the way we can use ChatGPTs and those things, because they never had that, but the way that we can take large volumes of information and be able to translate it very quickly, like you can now do it in languages, and then able to then condense it very quickly. The vision of where we're going with that is really, really big and changing the way we operate as
It
well.
really is, because it's another transformation in our in history, isn't it? And I think what you're saying about AI doing those summaries, I think that's spot on. And I think this is something that we need to learn, because when we and this be the same for Alexandria, really, isn't it? The information that's there for the search engine to use to make the summary, as long as the information is there, it can make a summary. But if the information is not there, and in strategy sort of terms, that's what often happens, is that in fact, all the information suggests that a project or an initiative is going quite well. It might be tracking on budget, it might be on schedule, but you're not going to be told that in fact, three people are no longer with the project. The project's in fact just being propped up. That's what I think we need to learn, how to best use AI in our world to extract information. But we cannot ask AI to make up the information that we need to figure out ourselves, because we are humans from other humans. That's what I think is one of the challenges. And we can go really wrong in that because we can just assume everything that comes back from ChatGPT or anything else has all of the information, but it isn't the case. We just need to be careful. But it's exciting times, I think, as well.
Another thought, Devishu, is because we've talked about there's so much information now because we've got AI and we're producing information. Something I struggle with, and I'm keen for your thoughts, is how do you personally balance the tension between collecting all this knowledge and then using the knowledge?
That's an important question, I think, David. Now, me personally, like, I love reading. I read a lot. I do listen to podcasts. I talk with people. You hear a lot of dot points. You collect them all the time. But actually turning them into knowledge is something quite different, isn't it? It's information. And for me personally, I need time to kind of sift through information. So if I've listened at a podcast on history, for example, I really only digest that information whilst I walk the dog, say, or when I'm preparing dinner or something. And then I find sometimes I have just one or two things, because it's remarkable how little you retain sometimes. After all the books that we've read, you can only really retain maybe one thing, two things. And I find in order to retain it, it's best if you can say it. If you can tell someone else about it, then I find I retain it for a little bit longer. But in the main, things come in and go out faster, and there's just so much knowledge. And today, I think an added challenge for us is to know what of the knowledge is true, and whether the knowledge that you see is unbiased. And that's another thing which I think, for me, just having some quiet time, really questioning what I've just read or what I've heard, whether that makes sense, whether there's a dissonance there. And then I can question it again or read something else to just check out, is this radical thought, does it make sense or not?
That's
That's what I.
insightful. When I think of, is the knowledge real? Because today, the way the world's going, in the way that we've got access to so much information, and with our projects all the time, we're making decisions based on information and data and knowledge. And I feel like that's almost becoming critical to our projects, because previously the knowledge was generally okay because there was less of it, and we
Yes.
knew someone was churning through it to create a story and a case, where today, and especially for younger people in the early parts of their career, they need to use this technology because that's what's there. It's very interesting that they also then have to be able to say, is this knowledge reasonable? It's really important, because all projects, I believe, I don't know how you feel, a lot of the decisions are based on credibility of where the project's at. And a lot of senior people, they don't want to know the knowledge. They just want to believe that it's on track, and they believe that it's the right things happening. And all of that belief comes back to the credibility, and that goes back to the knowledge that we're using. It's a real interesting challenge for our projects going forward, I think.
Yeah, it really is. I think one thing that we have perhaps lost, but I think we really need to work hard to bring it back, is referencing. I feel that if people write you a viewpoint, that you should have the right to ask, where did you get this from? Obviously not if it's their opinion piece, but we should really test where people's facts are coming from, because it just simply isn't the same if it comes from a referenced scientific journal or if it comes from Facebook. It just simply isn't
Yes.
the same. So, but unfortunately, we are getting a lot more information from not scientifically referenced documents. So that's something we really need to work at, getting better information out in the world.
Taking some of these concepts even a little bit further around the Library of Alexandria and then bringing it right into today, the way we live. If the library had a modern equivalent today, what do you imagine it would look like? Is it a campus? Is it a digital platform? Or is it a global network? What are your thoughts, Dewetia?
David, I think that toothpaste is actually out of the tube. It already exists, isn't it? Like the whole world is a global network. You can speak to almost anyone in the world in 2 seconds by using technology. Therein lies some big challenges as well. And I think there's some work to be done to make sure that the right kind of learnings get drawn to the right spaces in the global network. But I think it's really already out there. However, for me, I think we still need to protect our physical spaces. I think, without schools, without libraries, without universities, without places where we can debate as human beings, we will be much poorer for it. The ancients had it right in that sense. They didn't have all the world's knowledge, which is something we do have today, but they had physical spaces where people came together because they wanted to learn from other human beings, and that we must preserve.
When I reflect on what you just shared about the library, I mentor students at 4 different universities. And when I would talk to the students, it's become quite clear that they believe the library is the heart of the university. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because all students come to a central place called a library. It's not, you might have the School of Engineering, the School of Finance, you've got all these different schools, but the library itself is the heart. And I know myself, I now spend 1 day a week, I go to the library at the Wollongong University just to work on my growth projects that I'm working through, for example, this podcast. And I know when I go to the library, Dewetia, I just feel empowered because of all the people around me and also the space. I feel I'm absorbed in knowledge, which really inspires me. I agree with you. The physical assets are really cool because I think that's the way our brain still works.
Agree, for sure.
What's a final thought that you could leave us with about the Library of Alexandria and some of the lessons?
David, I think what we need to remind ourselves of is that history does teach us so many lessons. We can learn, and today there's so much knowledge out there, we can't even begin to tap into all of it. But one thing we must do, or must aspire to do, is to learn from history. And if we look at what's happened in history, some of those mistakes we repeat over and over in history, isn't it? And we don't need to do that. If we tap into knowledge and we tap into our own ability to think, to critically think about problems that we see in front of us, we ought to be able to improve on history and not repeat real blunders that we've made as a human race, I guess. So I think that's what's inspirational to me from knowledge. And in this podcast, we talked about the Library of Alexandria as a center of knowledge, and that's what I find so rich about it.
Well said. What a way to finish the podcast. So thank you again. We'll bring this podcast to a close. And Dewetia, I really want to thank you for your time and bring in all the knowledge that you have. And I know there's a lot of knowledge. We've worked together, I would be saying 15 years on many, many different projects. And the insights you brought on the library are fascinating, but I also know they're deep rooted in your knowledge of working in systems and in innovation and in documentation. So I really am grateful for you to share that knowledge with our audience.
Thank you, David.
And I hope our listeners have enjoyed this wonderful time together exploring the Library of Alexandria.